Um,
Welcome to the September meeting of the Culver City Democratic Club. We're here with Yvette Lindgren, who's a professor of law at the University of Missouri, Kansas City Law School, and currently visiting at UC Berkeley.
no, Hastings.
Hastings, pardon me. They'll be very upset about that. Maybe I can edit it later. So without further ado, I'll pass the mic to you, and you can tell us about your work and the recent situations in the Midwest around reproductive rights, and take questions from our members. So thanks for being here.
Sure. Well, thank you for having me. And I was asked to generally speak about abortion and democracy, especially because this is a group that is so focused on the democratic process. And so I'm really happy to have an opportunity to talk about this issue because it's one that is becoming increasingly important and is on the forefront of the minds of lots of legal scholars who write in reproductive rights and justice. And so, when the Supreme Court overturned Roe v. Wade and Planned Parenthood v. Casey in the Dobbs v. Jackson women's health case, the court promised that they were going to get the courts out of the business of abortion, and they were going to return the issue to the states and the democratic process where it belongs. And so in the wake of Dobbs, we are seeing what that promise of a democratic process on the abortion front looks like. And so that's where I'm going to focus my comments today, and I'll leave room at the end so we can discuss it, because it's such a fascinating topic and it's unfolding day to day. And so this is right at the very forefront of what's happening in this area of law. And at the highest level, I'm going to talk about how the promise of the democratic process to resolve the abortion issue has devolved, and we're seeing that abortion opponents are attacking, are using voter suppression and other sorts of tactics in order to usurp the will of the electorate. And we're seeing the impact of gerrymandering, and we are seeing lots of creative ways that abortion opponents and Republican legislators are attempting to usurp the democratic process now that abortion has been returned to the Democratic electorate. So to start, the Supreme Court promised to return the issue of abortion to the electorate and said that they wanted to, quote, allow women on both sides of the abortion issue to seek to affect the legislative process by influencing public opinion, lobbying legislatures, voting, and running for office. So they tee up this promise of this robust democratic process that is going to allow each state to make their own decisions about the abortion issue. And so we know that in the post-Dobbs landscape, state and local elections are going to become critical, not only for purposes of who they're going to elect to their legislatures, but it has cascading effects about that impact courts and as well as all levels of elected officials. So I'll start first with the importance of elections and the democratic process to state courts. Once the Supreme Court removed the floor of the federal protection of abortion under the Constitution, and they returned the issues to the state, state elections, state legislatures, and state constitutions are the places where abortion is going to be protected. And so we are seeing that battles are playing out in state courts, in Florida, in Michigan, in Kentucky, where state Supreme Courts are being asked to decide or to determine if abortion is protected under states' constitutions. Elections matter here, even though state courts are removed from direct election in terms of elected representatives. First, because state court judges, unlike federal court judges, are elected and can be removed. But an example out of Kansas, actually, let me turn to Iowa. The Iowa Supreme Court in 2018 held that abortion was a right protected under the state's constitution. In response, the legislature revised the judicial nomination process in order to shift more power to the governor, in this case, conservative Republican Governor Kim Reynolds, to be able to decide who gets to be on the Iowa Supreme Court. So this change in the nomination process granted greater control to the Republican governor, who stacked the court with conservative justices, who then overturned the 2018 decision the week before the Dobbs ruling. The fact that abortion protections are being fought in state courts is important because elections matter to state courts, even more than they matter in federal courts, because of elections and because of the way that the state. The other thing that we're seeing, in addition to this attempt to usurp state court decision-making, is in the initiative process, of course. In 2022, voters in 6 states decided on reproductive rights-related ballot measures, and in all of the instances, voted in favor of protecting or expanding abortion rights. The issue of elections is becoming clear that the majority of people support abortion rights. And so now we're seeing that there's an attempt being made to suppress the ability of the electorate to vote for abortion initiatives. The ballot initiative process, as you know, is available in many states. It's available in California. We know that it allows citizens to propose a ballot initiative or measure and to collect a minimum number of voter signatures that then allows it to be put on the statewide ballot. In 2022, Michigan voters passed an initiated constitutional amendment saying that the Michigan Constitution protects the right of abortion. But we are seeing that in response to concerns about the initiative process in abortion restrictive states like Ohio, Missouri, and Florida, that legislators have introduced bills to make it harder to introduce and pass initiative related constitutional amendments. Mississippi is considering prohibiting the use of initiative measures for abortion-related laws, so an abortion exception to the initiative process. So initiative processes could be used for every type of law except abortion-related laws. It is we're seeing that legislatures in abortion restrictive and banned states are trying to raise the threshold from a majority to something greater in order to pass initiative processes and its initiative measures, and it is directly in response to concerns about passing abortion-related initiatives. Currently 8 states have bills that would make it harder for citizens to initiate a ballot measure. that is put forth by a citizen initiative process. Ohio's issue 1 just got defeated in the last couple of weeks. Issue 1 would have raised the threshold for passing an initiated constitutional amendment from a simple majority of 50% to 60%, and would have also required that in order to get an initiated constitutional amendment on the ballot, petition signatures would have to come from 88 counties rather than the original 44 counties that was in existence. The Florida House introduced a resolution to raise the threshold for passing an initiated constitutional amendment from 60 to 67%. And one of the most exciting, of course, is the 2022 Kansas initiative process. I was, on the ground watching this whole thing unfold because Missouri, I'm in Kansas City, Missouri, and it is right, Kansas City straddles Missouri and Kansas. So Kansas voters rejected a ballot measure that would have amended the state constitution to say that it doesn't protect the right to abortion. And so it preserved Kansas's law that protects abortion. Currently, abortion is available in Kansas up to 22 weeks. But despite the fact that the Kansas initiative was voted down by voters, and they voted at 60% of Kansas voters directly cast their vote against banning abortion. Despite that fact, the Kansas legislature is considering numerous pieces of legislation that would restrict abortion. The Kansas House and Senate have introduced bills that would ban abortion at conception and make abortion level 1 felony with a minimum of 20 years in prison. And so we're seeing that even though voters are casting votes and being decisive in supporting abortion rights, the legislature is continuing to undermine it. People in Kansas argue that this is one of the most clear examples of the impact of gerrymandering in a state like Kansas, because we see that voters in Kansas are much more liberal than the legislatures that they have representing them in the Capitol. And, one of the things that was so surprising about the initiative defeat in Kansas. First off, is that Kansas is a reliably red state, but also that they thought that the votes were going to be coming from liberal urban areas. But in fact, there was a great deal of support for defeating the ballot initiative in Western Kansas, which is very rural and very conservative. And they believe that there was a real gender divide there, that as much as people were saying that they are pro-life, when they got into the privacy of the ballot box, female voters in Kansas were voting against the initiative at a much higher rate than their male counterparts. There is no place where the battle for democracy and the ballot initiative process is being waged more fiercely right now than in Missouri. This has several iterations, and it really exemplifies how much this the question of abortion is so integrally tied right now to the question of democracy. First, the Missouri legislature, of course, Missouri legislature is very conservative, very captured by a very conservative right-wing faction, and Republicans in Missouri wanted to pass a law that would raise, of course, the ballot initiative requirement from a simple majority of 50% to a supermajority to prevent the adoption of abortion-related citizens initiatives. Because of disagreements among Republicans, they weren't able to do it. And so, there was much rejoicing among abortion rights supporters in Missouri that their ballot initiative process that they want to get on the 2024 ballot can be passed by a simple majority. And so the ballot initiative was drafted up by abortion supporters. The first step of the process is that they would send it to have it reviewed, and then the language, the language of the bill would then be summarized before it would be its fiscal impact would be decided, and then it would be ready to have signatures be collected. So the ballot initiative that they put forth is very broadly worded. It includes the protection of reproductive rights, very broadly defined. It would include the protection of that the right could not be infringed to prenatal care, the rights related to childbirth, postpartum care, birth control, abortion care, miscarriage management, respectful birthing conditions. One thing that's really important to reproductive justice advocates in Missouri is that they have a law that prohibits standalone birthing centers. And so people who are pregnant in Missouri have to go to hospitals in order to, or birthing centers that are connected to hospitals. And so one of the important initiatives to try and combat high Black maternal and infant mortality is to have standalone birthing centers that are designed to support, that are community-based, have lots of support from doulas and other sort of community care and healthcare workers. And that is at this moment prohibited in Missouri. So that's part of this initiative. So they put together this broad-based initiative, and the Missouri Attorney General, Andrew Bailey, refused to certify the initiative. Well, there were two levels. First, he refused to certify the ballot initiative because the state auditor, who is also a Republican named Scott Fitzpatrick, he looked it over and he said that the fiscal impact of the ballot initiative would be about $51,000. And the Attorney General, Bailey, insisted that the actual cost, the actual fiscal impact should be $51 billion and the loss of federal Medicare. So it was absolutely fabricated and wildly inaccurate, but he wanted to put it in there because he wanted voters to be very hesitant about voting on this ballot initiative. He refused to certify it, and so it couldn't go to no one could start getting signatures on it. It got completely held up. It was clearly a stalling tactic. It meant that the initiative process was required by law and in Missouri to take 56 days. It took 150 days instead. And so he was definitely trying to eat up the time that proponents had in order to gather signatures. Then the next tactic they took was that the Secretary of State, so that the fiscal impact was, finally resolved through courts. And then it goes to the Secretary of State, John Ashcroft, who is in charge of composing the language summarizing the ballot issue, so that when a voter is in the voting, gets their voting booklet, they can read a short synopsis of the law. So he's been charged with summarizing the language for the ballot initiative. And while the language of the petition says that it would amend the Constitution to declare that, quote, the government shall not infringe upon a person's fundamental right to reproductive freedom. When they read what Ashcroft's summary language was, his summary language that would, of course, appear on all of the voter materials said, quote, that the proposed amendment would, quote, allow for dangerous, unregulated, and unrestricted abortions from conception to live birth without requiring a medical license or potentially being subject to medical malpractice. So, before supporters can collect signatures, they had to wait for the Secretary of State to write this description of the proposed law and the fiscal summary. As I said, they've been engaged in clear delay tactics. They're now at 150 days. Now suit has been filed by the ACLU. It was just heard on the 11th, which I think it was Monday. So it's just being bogged down in the courts, and it's highly unlikely that because, as even the judge in the case who heard the case on Monday said, I'm going to make my ruling as quickly as I can, but doubtless someone is going to appeal. And so it's, the time is shortening for them to get, I think they have to get 180,000 signatures. Ballot initiatives, of course, are one of the most purest expressions of electoral voting, right? It is not going through layers of legislatures who've been voted into office, but it is the most pure direct democracy that we have. It is very populist in its incarnation. And of course, that this inherently democratic initiative process has been thwarted by delay and resorting to courts courts are an inherently undemocratic institution. And ironically, of course, it has long been the rallying cry of conservative jurists who say that activist courts are usurping the democratic process. And yet we're finding that once we know that the democratic process supports abortion rights, we're seeing abortion opponents turning to the courts. In Missouri, was their delay tactic, is they're just grinding grinding things to a halt through the courts. We saw it in the Mifepristone ruling out of Texas with Judge Kaczmarek. That suddenly, the organizations who long decried, the role of courts in abortion are turning to courts in order to thwart abortion rights. And so, and of course, the irony that Dobbs has argued that they are, that they need to, Roe v. Wade was wrong from its inception, and that it was wrong for the Supreme Court in Roe to take the issue of abortion away from voters and through judicial fiat make law instead of letting legislatures do it. We are seeing a complete flip now. There's many other attacks from abortion restrictive and banned states. They are many, and they are creative. One thing they're trying to do to suppress the vote, because they know that young voters overwhelmingly support abortion, is to try and limit the ability of young people to vote on college campuses. As I said before, we are seeing the impact of gerrymandering in places like Kansas and other states where the voters and the legislature are very far apart. State legislatures in these states are significantly more conservative than their electorate. They are being kept in line by party leaders and conservative funders. and are no longer responsive to voters. As I said, Kansas is a great example. 60% of voters voted against the anti-abortion initiative, and despite that, both the House and Senate in Kansas have proposed legislation that would ban abortion at conception. So we're seeing lots of different ways that state legislatures in abortion banned and restrictive states are trying to compensate for the fact that voters support abortion rights. And of course, if we can't talk about the importance of democracy and election without especially on the verge of a presidential election year, to note that federal elections are absolutely critical. If Republicans win control of Congress and the presidency, they will surely pass a federal abortion ban that strips states of the ability to choose to protect abortion under their own state laws. So that is always a looming out there. So I'll end there. I mean, those are some of the things that I am seeing, on my radar in terms of, if you care about democracy, you should care about abortion rights, and what it's looking like in my state of Missouri. It's really, the fight for abortion rights is being waged in the realm of the democratic process, and it is suffering some casualties. So I'd love to open it up to conversation and questions.
Well, thanks so much. So yes, if anyone has a question for Professor Lindgren, please raise your Zoom hand, and I'll just call on you in order. Danny Young.
Hello. Hi, Professor. Thanks for coming out and speaking with us tonight on this very important topic. Just listening to what you're saying, I guess this is kind of more of a comment, but I'll see where I get to it by the end of it. Just listening to what you're saying, it strikes me how much more effective the right wing is at getting what they want legislatively than we who tend to lean towards the left seem to be. Even when we have the popular vote, maybe the popular will, maybe even the legislature, it just seems like we almost never get anything that we need. And I'm just wondering if you have like any takeaways from that observation, or have like any advice for us, or like thoughts on what we can do about that, or just anything on that.
I mean, that is such a great observation. And I talk with lots of people who are thinking and writing in this area, and that issue comes up time and again, because legal scholars and academics are like, well, we could do this or we could do that, but the response is always like, oh, we can't do that, like that's what they do. When you think about Texas's SB 8, the civil bounty law out of Texas, it was enforced when Roe v. Wade was still good law, and brought abortion provision to an absolute halt in Texas by just this creative legal strategy. And and the question has been asked, well, why aren't people who are supportive of abortion using a similar tactic, if we know it works? So I completely agree with you. It is we've seen that abortion opponents have been willing to go to very extreme measures in order, and very creative legal strategies. And I don't think that abortion rights supporters have the same stomach for it. I mean, we're seeing some more creative uses coming out. I think we'll see some more aggressive abortion protections now that Texas is suggesting that they are going to start prosecuting people for aiding and abetting in travel, that states are going to start implementing travel bans, which is such a clear constitutional violation, at least if Brett Kavanaugh is to be believed in his concurring opinion. And I think that but I feel like we're already there. I think that the time for some aggressive creative strategies to protect reproductive rights is probably in order now.
Thanks, James McGaffey.
Hi, thank you very much. I really appreciate your presentation. Trying to think about things in a way, just thinking what's going on in the world. And I was really struck when I read, I think just this week, that Mexico has now passed, an abortion right across the country, a staunchly, I think, Catholic country.
Yeah.
Keep in mind, like, I think Ireland has done the same thing, another Catholic country. And I'm wondering about the dynamics that are going on, that it will swing one way, it'll swing the other, to what extent things going on in the world will have a difference. But I also kind of think that the rise of women having more and more power, like they spoke out in Kansas and just said, no, you're not going to do this. I wonder, I don't know, what was it in Mexico that made that happen in Mexico? Was it women's rights? What's going on, and to what extent we should think about that? But, that happened in Mexico, and I thought that was pretty significant.
Yeah, I mean, I'm so glad that you brought that up. And, one area that I have been really interested in and have been writing a significant amount in is in self-managed care. That there's increasing evidence that people are accessing, safe and effective medication abortion through channels that are informal channels or through international pharmacies. And now we're finding that abortion rights proponents in Mexico are helping people capable of becoming pregnant in the United States by providing them access to medication abortion. Medication abortion is, or the drug mifepristone is available over the counter in Mexico. And so they're helping get drugs into the United States, which is just the most incredible turn of events that no one could have seen coming. But to your question as to what was the process seems to be the same in Ireland, in Mexico, even in the pre-Roe period. And we're starting to see it now, which is that abortion is healthcare, and abortion is necessary healthcare for so many reasons, other than someone wants to, of course, I hate the term, but electively terminate a pregnancy. And so we're seeing these cases coming out almost daily of people who are suffering serious harm and injury from being delayed or denied care. And in fact, the research coming out of Texas, which is the longest period we have to study of what it looks like when people have no access to abortion, are showing that there's an average of 9 days of delay, which is significant, that people are experiencing sepsis. They are being forced to travel out of state while they are actively miscarrying. And so, public opinion is quickly turning. Like I was just reading, someone described it that those stories that are coming out and are undeniable they are evaporating the center. That people who sort of straddled the center are now moving into supporting abortion rights because of its impact on the health of women and these harrowing stories. And that's what was happening is in Mexico. In Ireland, it was that a specific woman whose name I can't remember now died when she was denied an abortion because she went in miscarrying. There was still a fetal heart tone. They couldn't perform the abortion under Irish law. They sent her home, and she eventually ended up becoming septic. She was a medical student. She became septic and she died. And that was the thing that triggered it. So, we're seeing that happening now. I think it's going to gain momentum, and I think it's going to turn the tides. Already we're seeing pressure in places like Tennessee, for example. Their total abortion ban has no or incest exception, and also had no emergency exception. Their emergency exception was that a doctor could use a medical emergency as a defense to prosecution, but they didn't have a standing emergency exception in the abortion ban itself. And the people in Tennessee really pushed back, and it was revised because people are so concerned about women's health. And I think it is, the number of people who experience miscarriages is extremely high. And I think people have personal experience either of themselves or people they know who've needed emergency care related to pregnancy. So.
James, do you have a second question?
Yeah, thank you, Jeff. If I can just pick up on that as well. In thinking about Mexico and what you're saying about the issue, this is healthcare. How many Americans have been going across the border for decades to get medications that they can't afford in the United States? Now we're going to be going across the border for medical services that we can't get in the United States. And I saw some story, I don't know if it was 60 Minutes or Frontline or something, about doctors traveling across the country to places. There was a place in Illinois, right at the tip of Illinois, that women coming from all kinds of southern states, Texas and Missouri and Arkansas, are all traveling to that one city, but also doctors were coming around the country because that was a distance that people could travel. But I thought it would be so much closer for people in Texas to just drive across the border to cities in Mexico if there can be more services. Granted, Mexico's got, enough probably unmet needs that they don't need Americans coming there, taking up their clinic space.
Yeah.
But at the same time, if we, have a way for Americans to get that service across the border as well, it certainly makes us look bad. And maybe women will just say, this is ridiculous. The US will say, this is ridiculous that we have to go across the border to get a service that we should be able to get here in the United States.
Yeah, that's such a good point. Yeah, and this interjurisdictional, some folks wrote a law review article they named it the interjurisdictional abortion wars, and it's about all this, people traveling. That I think that clinic in Illinois is right across the border from St. Louis, and so Missouri. Abortion's been effectively unavailable in Missouri for a long time now, long before the Dobbs decision. I think in 2019, there were 167 abortions performed in Missouri, down from 6,000 a decade earlier, just because of all of the restrictive laws. So people are already traveling, and, the comment was made earlier about how it disproportionately impacts people living in poverty, who are disproportionately people of color. And it is very untenable. And the idea of going down to Mexico is, that interjurisdictional abortion care is now going to be international is really something.
Leah Pressman.
So, I was just thinking about how profoundly it impacts all kinds of healthcare, because and how it's likely to really increase disparities. I mean, they already have shortages of different specialties, and people who are in obstetrics and in gynecology, they don't want to practice in that kind of context. It becomes really dangerous for them.
Yeah.
And they leave, and then they're, only the richest people can afford even just ordinary, normal, non-abortion care.
Yep. There's lots of research coming out about how OBGYNs are leaving abortion restrictive states. Medical schools in those states are not able to attract OBGYN residents. So essentially, we're going to have compounding issues, because not only is abortion not going to be available, but when someone has a medical emergency, they're going to be being treated by doctors who were not trained in how to give an abortion, even if someone is in need of one because they have an ectopic pregnancy or they're miscarrying. It is really, yeah.
Gina Harris.
Thanks, Jeff. Hi, Yvette. It's funny you mentioned that about the attracting OB-GYN residents, because I since I work with them, I literally heard one. She's a senior that's looking for work, and she had said she got a contacted from a recruiter in Central Florida, recruiting OB-GYN, and because it's very competitive here in California for those obvious reasons. And the question is, like, as soon as she said Central Florida, she was like, "Oh, hail to the no." And she's a great doctor, but I guess my thing is like looking from the legalities of it. I always am looking at the root cause, and I don't know why this isn't being pushed enough. I feel that we are not pressuring these electeds and judges to admit what their bias is on deciding these cases, because I do know they're violating the Constitution because it's based off of religious belief. And which will violate, the separation of church and state, which I'm pretty sure at all levels of government is happening. And it's kind of one of those things, like from the legal perspective, have you guys been trying to see, like, I mean, I would even creep on their social media to pull that. But if you were to find that, that a judge, for example, was guilty of that, is there something that you could do? Because I think that could set a precedent and cause a big snowball, which I would be like, yeah, get him.
Okay, so you should go to law school, because the Americans United for Separation of Church and State just brought suit in Missouri challenging Missouri's abortion ban on an establishment clause claim. So we've seen religious suits in Florida and other places where they said it's a free exercise claim. Abortion is part of my religious practice, and so you're violating my free exercise. But the Americans United brought it on a establishment clause claim. And the reason they chose Missouri, I helped to draft part of their complaint. The reason they chose Missouri is because the Missouri legislature, in passing the abortion ban, just all of them were talking about God and religion and how this is the divine will. And so they were like, okay, here we go. So it's possible that it's likely it's not going to be successful, because but they're really trying to change hearts and minds to show people this is what's animating these laws. This is not about fetal life. This is about, what some people describe as Christian nationalism.
Exactly. That's where I kind of wanted to display, but from the far right perspective, since they have now hijacked the American flag to make it their flag, I wanted to highlight the violation of the Constitution, because they love to hide behind the flag and the Constitution. And I'm happy to see that that's happening in Missouri. I think that, I would say that even if it's not successful, making that extremely public to the Americans, because it shows the hypocrisy. And I think to the American messaging, they need to see that messaging like bright letters, because I think that would be you guys are hypocrites. You're violating your own Constitution, and then open up the door more.
Yeah.
Okay. Thank you for sharing that, though. That's good to know.
Vilma Dawson.
Hi, Professor Lindgren. I'm enjoying your presentation, not, of course, the outcomes, but I'm learning a great deal. My focus is on Wisconsin and Judge Protasiewicz and the 11-point lead or landslide that she enjoyed, and what the Republican legislature plans to do in terms of her ability to decide on redistricting cases. I'm wondering if there's a role for the ACLU in terms of a more robust response than Ben Wickler in the Wisconsin Democratic Party, which is basically to go after the Republicans in 2024. In the intervening year, what's going to happen with Judge Protasiewicz's ability to act on the mandate that the popular vote gave her?
Yeah. There are so many, I don't know the particulars. I've just been reading the news on it. But there are so many examples of attempts to thwart the judicial branch in response. I gave the example of Iowa. The Iowa Supreme Court says that abortion is protected under the state's constitution, and then Republicans fiddle with the system so that Kim Reynolds can essentially restack the court. But there's lots of examples of it, and of problems with the separation of powers, with the state legislature trying, because in response to abortion rulings, trying to shift power back to state legislatures and away from courts. There are so many ways that abortion is warping, foundational principles of democracy. And so I think that, Wisconsin's a great example of how we're seeing it. And it's all bound up together. And it is ultimately thwarting the will of the electorate.
Okay, well, I don't see any other hands raised, so I'd like to call back to something Cynthia was talking about before we started going, about the federalism issue. That this situation where the laws in different states are so different that people can be criminally prosecuted for going between states. And I think Cynthia, I'm not a lawyer, much less a law professor, but it seemed very resonant that Cynthia, evoked a pre-Civil War period.
Yeah.
I wonder if you could expand.
Yeah, these interjurisdictional abortion wars are, we're seeing states are trying to extend the reach of their state laws, abortion laws, beyond their own state's jurisdiction. We're seeing it in abortion ban states, of course, through travel bans. But we're seeing it also in abortion protective states. So, for example, the state of Massachusetts passed a law that telehealth is becoming a place where lots of people are able to access, until the Supreme Court decides on that Texas mifepristone case. So, but at this moment in time, people are accessing safe abortion through medication abortion through telehealth. And so the state of Massachusetts passed a law that changed the prescribing rules for their own providers, and said that their providers can prescribe medication abortion to anyone in the country, regardless of what what the residents' own state laws provide. They only need to prescribe in accordance with Massachusetts laws. Well, Massachusetts does not have a parental consent law. And of course, they don't have an abortion ban. So they are able to, and they're shielded. So they also have a shield law that says that if they're dragged into court in a neighboring state because of action that they took in Massachusetts that was legal in the state of Massachusetts, but not legal in the state where the person they prescribed to lives, that they're protected from prosecution. And that, and it tells, law enforcement that they're not allowed to comply with any, neighboring states' subpoenas or court orders. And so they've insulated Massachusetts providers to be able to provide abortions across the country to minors and to anyone, and to mail the medication through the mail. That telehealth medication abortion thing is what the Republicans and abortion opponents are trying to lock down. And that is going to be very draconian. It is going to engage lots of questions around governmental surveillance. This idea of using private civil bounty hunters like SB8 is a way to try and have granular surveillance within people's own homes by their abusive partners, their parents, their disapproving neighbors, their friends, that they can be people who aid and abet and in an abortion. And we saw that in Texas. We saw the husband or the ex-husband who sued his wife's friends because they helped get the wife medication abortion when she was pregnant and trying to leave her abusive husband. And he brought them to court, and he had legal representation. So, this attempt to strain the bounds of federalism by having states exert their own state laws into the beyond their own state laws boundaries, and the attempt to be able to sue people within their state for actions that took place in a neighboring state is very, very troubling. Oh, and then there's the Comstock Act. Yes. Oh, absolutely. That they are trying to dust off a very, very old law that has not been in use for, over 100 years. They're trying to dust it off and use it to try and prohibit the movement of medication abortion across state lines through the mails. It's a really wild time to be a reproductive rights scholar. I've been writing on this subject for a decade, and it's just really incredible. It is bleak. Yes.
Can I ask you a personal question related to that?
Yeah.
I heard that you sometimes go by Yvette and sometimes by Yvonne in order to throw off the haters and stalkers. Is that why?
No. I like that though. That adds to my sort of street cred. No, my legal name is Yvonne, but I was named after my French grandmother who went by Yvette, which is the diminutive, Yvonne, Yvette. And so I publish under Yvonne, but I go by Yvette. So. And I should just go by Yvette, but now I've already started, anyway. But I do like that it's a pseudonym to throw off haters.
Well, I'm glad I didn't blow your cover then. We have been sharing links to your page of open access publications, and those are all under Yvonne. So
yeah.
That will clear up any confusion for people who want to go and look at those, which I absolutely think they should. James.
I want to say, yes, it's bleak at the moment, but I really do want to hope that with these pendulum swings, when they swing this far to the crazy, this far to the anti-American, not Constitution, then it's going to come back. I'm old enough to remember banning anything that gave rights to people in the LGBT community and the anti-immigrant stuff here in California. And then we, swung the other way. So I can only hope that we will swing back in 2024 in some kind of way that'll.
I am so glad you said that. I have to agree. I think that the American people are, they support abortion rights. I think they're not having it in terms of having their political voices, taken away from them. I have to say, being in Kansas when that whole thing was unfolding, and then when they lost the election, I literally couldn't believe it. This is Kansas we're talking about. So I absolutely agree. I think that it is bleak, and we're in difficult times, but I think that we are going to come out on the other end stronger with a deeper sense of the importance of democracy, and I think we're going to be. I think this is really revealing to us, as I said, the impact of gerrymandering and Citizens United, and that people are going to wrest back control, because this is an issue that is important and people's lives are on the line.
I think that's a great place to end. Thank you so much for being here. It's a great presentation. Thanks to everybody for your questions and comments. And I'm going to turn off the recording now.
Great. Thanks for having me. It was a really